Hey everybody, here's a little look at my Mollog's mob that I just finished up. This is going to be a bit of a different than my other tutorials in that I'm just going to kind of walk through what I did with these guys and talk about it a bit, and then direct you over to my blog where there's going to be more pictures of the finished models and probably a couple work in progress ones. You know, I've been away from this for a couple years now and just getting back into the swing of things, so I haven't got back into videotaping all my painting. But I might try to do that with my next project, which I think is going to be these orcs from Blood Bowl, which is, it's only a half a team, so it's Blitz Bowl actually that I'm playing, or I've played a couple times. But anyways, yeah, since I was last posting videos regularly, you know, GW's really stepped it up with their tutorials. Duncan tutorials and Peachy are awesome, so I highly recommend those. And in terms of Mollog's mob, you know, that's a good starting point. If you want to check out Duncan's tutorial on that, I think it was Duncan who did the Mollog's mob, or at least Mollog anyways. That's a really good place to start. And what I'm going to do is kind of try to add to that, see what I did a bit differently. And if you have any comments or questions, my blog is probably a better place for comments or questions to get answered, but feel free to do that on YouTube as well. I'll try to get to them when I can. So Mollog himself, I started out by airbrushing some base colors here. You can see some fleshy colors here on his belly, and I tried to do a little bit of that on his elbows and his wrists and his knuckles, but mostly his belly. And what I did is I airbrushed everything, some rough colors, basically dark Reaper for most of the skin here, just to give it a kind of good base, and then did a fleshy color on the front. It was actually a badger flesh color, which is, see if I can find it here. I think this is it here. So it's badger flesh. These badger paints, I picked them up really cheaply at a hobby store a couple years back. I got them for like $1 a bottle, which was super cheap. I couldn't refuse it, so I bought the whole set. I think it was a whole set. Whatever they had, I bought, and really like these. They kind of can behave a little funny after when you're painting over top of them. I find sometimes they liquefy again, so you got to be careful with that. Maybe a good coat of matte varnish after would have helped that. But they come out of the airbrush really well. I use an Iwata airbrush, and it doesn't matter. So there you go. So that was that flesh color there. And then I base coated everything in Dark Reaper and started layering up. The layers that I used were mostly the Space Wolf gray colors. So that's rust gray and Fenrisian gray. And so I tried to build up the highlights with that, sort of from a, you know, object source lighting, top down kind of a look. So the bottom side of it's darker. And then once I had that basically highlighted, I didn't do any of the cracked skin here. I went over with a couple of layers of thinned down purple wash. So I thinned it 50-50 approximately with Liniment medium, and mostly, so I did a full coat of that and then touched up the highlights, and then I did a number of coats of that, just sort of targeted into all the folds here. And I really liked that because the gray and the purple kind of contrast each other really nicely. You've got a sort of a, you know, a blue gray on the highlights and a deep purple blue on the shades there. And really liked how that worked. I didn't really do much with the joints here. I kind of just left them the way they came out of the airbrush, and after the one coat of thinned down purple wash, I just kind of left it be. Then I went back with the Fenrisian gray and the rust gray and tried to highlight just the edges of all the cracks, so anything on his that looks cracked like that, and also touched a bit on any of these sort of bumps all over him. So that was the main part of the skin on him. I followed the tutorial for the mouth there. I kind of highlighted up the lip and then gave it a purple wash. Oh, sorry, a Kubora crimson wash. His yellow eyes and his teeth are pretty standard, you know, Ushabti bone, Screaming Skull highlight, that sort of a thing. And his fingernails, same. Follow the tutorial basically to a T. I don't have the turquoise that they use. It's a newer one. I think it's Thousand Suns or something like that. So I just used the ones that I had around. This mushroom here is a lot of the Rakrath flesh and Pallid Witch flesh highlights with a bit of a thinned down purple shade on that, and then touched all the spots there for that. Let's see what other things. I followed the basic concept for the frog from the tutorial, which was, which one was it? That was Strachan Green, I believe it was, and no, sorry, Elysian Green and an Ogden Green camo. But I really wanted it to be that sort of a green, a transparent green sort of a look, and I went back and I played around with some yellow tints and stuff like that. Used the Lamenter's yellow glaze to get a bit more yellowy looking and sickly. I kind of want it to look, didn't want it to look very tough or anything, not too dark colors. All these mushrooms here, again, it was Rackarath flesh, highlighted up with the Pallid Witch flesh, and then a thin down purple wash all over everything, and then the Pallid Witch flesh highlight again. I did the fur a little bit differently, but you can't really tell. It's not really a focal point, so won't worry about that. But all the leather and stuff, I think I kind of followed the tutorial for that. So he's, you know, basically the box art, which is how I like to do things. For the Stalag Squig, I use my Reaper paints on this one. So I've got all the Reaper Master Series paints here. I've got these triads, and what I do is I just kind of go through and I pick whatever one I want, and I use those. So for this one here, I used the Shadow Stone triad. So I base coated it with the GW paints, washed it, and then basically did all my layering with these three paints here. And that gives you that color. I mean, you can do the same thing with GW. I just, I kind of like the Reaper stuff. I have all the paints, so I enjoy using those. It's kind of a no-brainer when it comes to the triads. And yeah, skulls and mushrooms, nothing too unusual there. I did the tongue originally red, but then I gave it a purple wash just to kind of tone it down a bit. And that's that. For the Bat Squig, again, followed basic box art. The reds are all your standard Mephiston red, Evil Suns, and Wild Rider red. I tried to do a bit of something different on the wings here, and so that's your, which one are those? These are the Slanesh gray purples. And so I was like a purple wash to start it off, and then try to highlight it up to the wing tips there, just to give it a bit more contrast and show that it was kind of a different fleshy sort of a thing. A note actually on the bases, I'll get to that at the end, how I did those and why I did those that way. And here's the Spite Shroom. Again, box art standard except for the spore cloud there. All of the light colors are done with a thin down purple wash and then your Pallid Witch flesh highlight, basically. That's just Pallid Witch flesh and Rackarath flesh seem to be a big favorite these days, to get sort of your off-whites and sickly sort of colors or whatever. Did the purples in a Reaper purple. So which one was that? That was going to be this this purple here, Deep Amherst, Indigo Sky, Pale Indigo. Again, I just kind of like how Reaper colors cover with the highlights. They come out nice and matte, and sometimes with GW stuff you have a bit. Some of them come a bit more transparent. Reaper ones just seem to be a bit more consistent with the stages in between the highlights, and so I find that there's a little less work to get them to work out exactly how I want. For this mushroom here, for the spore cloud, really tried to get a good base color of yellow. And I tried doing this all by hand, and it just wasn't turning out. Yellows are just, I have a really hard time with yellows. I'm not great at them. Maybe I'm not patient enough to wait for my white to dry before I put yellow on top of it, that sort of thing. So I got my airbrush out and got the green from my Badger paints, and just did a sort of a straight down green spray. So you kind of see, I targeted some of the tops of these things here, so it wasn't purely straight down, but tried to get that to look like it was you know, fading up into green as it gets further away from the mushroom. And then I think I touched up a couple things with some of the which ones were they? The orc skin flesh colors. So the WAF flesh, Warboss green, sort of colors there to try to blend from the airbrush into the yellow. So finally, the bases on these guys, I've done my Gloomspite Gits, well, Zarbag's Gits, I guess it is, the same color as these. And I found, you know, with caves, I don't know of any caves that have, you know, gray stalactites or stalagmites or whatever. Most of the caves you see like that are sort of limestone caves, and so they have this sort of a off-white color, this calcium sort of deposits. So, so that's why I went with that color. I also felt that it contrasted the models better. And if I find the triad here, it was these khaki ones that I used, this terrain khaki triad. And so it's khaki shadow, terrain khaki, and khaki highlight. To base coat it, I used the GW paints. I think it was XV88 or something like that. It doesn't have to be exact when you're doing base coats. So you base coat it and then start working up the highlights. And the sort of the rule I use is sort of the shade one for the Reaper color. I cover, you know, basically everything, and again give it a wash or just do a targeted wash around things with you know, one of the GW, say Reichland Flesh Shade or Seraphim Sepia. And then the middle one I try to cover, say, 50%. So I avoid the lowlights and cover everything, including all the highlights. And then the top one I try to cover, say, 25 or 10%, depending of the highlighted areas, and that sort of gives me a wide range of colors. To go along with the limestone, you end up with these pools that are really colorful, at least in certain lights they are. And so for that I wanted to do that sort of a turquoisey, glowy sort of a look. I saw some cool pictures on Instagram where somebody had the same idea, and so I kind of copied that. For the colors though, I used some of the Stegodon green, Incubi Darkness, that sort of a thing, and tried to highlight up. I was using some Reaper ones. Which one was it here? It might have been. It wasn't those ones there. It's more of a turquoisey color. Oh, is this one, the Seafoam green? And it wasn't the right color at all, but it gave me kind of a starting point, and then I was able to glaze things. I think the key one that I used was Gauss Blaster Green. That's an edge highlighter from GW, and that was the key color for this, was the Gauss Blaster. I found that really gave it that greeny tinge, and then I used some washes to kind of touch up those ripples there. They were pretty hard to do because there's not a lot of relief detail there. Yeah, so that's basically it. Gloomspite Gits. Sorry, not Gloomspite, Mollog's Mob, which are part of the Gloomspite Gits, Battle Tome, I guess. Looking forward to playing these guys in Underworlds, Night Vault, Shadespire, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, give them a shot. Check out my blog. I'll put some finished pictures of these guys, sort of in you know, with a nice white background, so you can get some good detail there. It's hard to see the detail in this video. And be sure to check out my blog, my Instagram. Posting sort of work in progress stuff on Instagram and maybe some throwback stuff. I just posted some Assassins things on there because of figuring Assassins are coming out. Oh, and one last thing. I wanted to make a display case or display base for these guys, and I've got into 3D printing recently, so I kind of designed this base here. This was my first prototype, and basically turned out okay, except that there wasn't enough curves on the circle, so it doesn't actually quite fit in there. But the idea was that you have this, you know, spots for each of the guys, and you know, when you take your guys to a tournament or whatever, you can kind of show them off this way. Once I did the first prototype though and realized I had to reprint it anyways, I kind of got overly ambitious and did a giant one. So let's zoom out a little bit here. There we go. So excuse the mess on my table here. So the idea here was to have your blocked terrain pieces sort of built in. It goes that way, I guess. And yeah, so I designed this on Tinkercad. The stalactites or stalagmites, whatever ones they were somebody else's design. I just imported that and remixed it into here. I thought I'd make another little pool here out of one of the block tiles, and then Mollog and his crew can each fit in each of these spots. As I was doing this, I found some cool mushrooms on Thingiverse, and so I thought I'd put those out, maybe put them on there somewhere, to sort of add a bit more depth to this whole scene. There's this really cool one here, actually, that would be its own cool blocked hex, I think. I think really I should redo this one here without those stalactites, and then maybe add this one to that, and that would be all done. Anyways, I'll post some pictures of that on Instagram as I work on it. Maybe a tutorial or something on my blog if I get this finished. I also want to do a similar one for my Gloomspite Gits. Sorry, my Zarbeg's Gits. And yeah, this one here didn't turn out. I didn't have good support on there. But yeah, so you can see I'm getting into 3D printing as well. That's sort of what I've been doing the last couple of years instead of GW stuff. But now I'm back into doing a bit of both, and we'll see how this goes. Anyways, give me your comments below, and I hope you enjoyed this. Check out my blog, Instagram, and see you next time.